man who fought for working-class ambition because he lived it. As one of the key architects of a Labour government, John achieved that rare thing. He changed people's lives, and he set the path for us all to follow. And I will always be grateful to him for that. And Mr. Speaker, he did it all in his own way, with humour, with pride, passion and total conviction. He truly was a one-off. Mr. Speaker, there will be a moment for fuller tributes, but today I send my deepest condolences, and I'm sure of the whole House, to John's wife, Pauline, and his family, to the city of Hull and all those who knew him and loved him. His legacy lives on in all of us. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to update the House on my engagements at COP and G20. We live in a dangerous and volatile world. We all wish that wasn't the case, but it is. And Mr. Speaker, that means global problems are reaching into the lives of our constituents more and more. Climate change causes extreme weather, like the terrible floods we saw in September, and it drives down economic growth. Conflicts drive up the prices of fuel, of food and energy, and threaten our stability and security. And both are drivers of migration. So to serve the British people, we must tackle these problems head-on, because they do not stop at our borders, and this is the fundamental point. And so in every meeting I had at COP and at the G20, in every agreement I entered into, my focus was on tackling these problems to deliver growth and security for the British people. Mr. Speaker, at COP I made the case that we must act on climate change and nature loss as some of the greatest long-term threats that we face. And in doing so, we must seize the opportunities of the low-carbon economy for investment, for UK businesses and for British workers. At COP, I was proud to announce the UK's new nationally determined contribution with a 2035 target to reduce all greenhouse gas emissions by at least 81% on 1990 levels. I called on other countries to match that ambition, to limit global temperature rises to 1.5 degrees. And I made the investment case for the transformation that we're leading here in the United Kingdom. Because, Mr. Speaker, by launching GB Energy, creating the National Wealth Fund to build new energy infrastructure, and setting a path to clean power by 2030, we will not just boost our energy security and protect bill payers, but we'll also put Britain in pole position to claim the clean energy jobs of the future. Yeah. And that's why at COP I was able to announce a £1 billion wind turbine investment which will support 1,300 local jobs around Hull, something John would have been very proud of, to produce enough clean energy to power 1 million homes. And that, of course, is in addition to the recent investment in carbon capture in Teesside and Merseyside that will create 4,000 jobs, and the investment announced by my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, for 11 new green hydrogen projects across Britain. Mr. Speaker, of course, tackling climate change is a global effort. So at the G20, together with Brazil and 10 other countries, I launched our Global Clean Power Alliance to speed up the international rollout of clean power, to accelerate investment and cut emissions around the world. Mr. Speaker, we came together at the G20 to meet other challenges as well. I was pleased to join President Lula's Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty to bring about an end to the lost decade in that fight, because this is also an investment in stability and in tackling the factors that force people to leave their homes and make long journeys that too often end with criminal gangs exploiting them and putting their lives at risk in the English Channel. Mr. Speaker, we will smash those gangs, and I'm sure the House will welcome the news from the Netherlands last week, where the National Crime Agency, operating with European partners, arrested a man suspected of being a major supplier of small boats equipment. We will hit these organised criminals with the full force of the law. But we will also work with partners to address the root causes of the problem. Mr. Speaker, the G20 represents 85% of global GDP. So we have a shared interest in driving up growth and investment. I held productive bilateral meetings with many G20 leaders to that end: Brazil, Japan, Italy, South Africa, the Republic of Korea and others. I also met Italy and Japan together to take forward the Global Combat Air Programme to build the next generation of fighter jets and create high-skilled jobs and strengthen our national security for the long term. And I had a good discussion with Prime Minister Modi about deepening our bilateral ties. We agreed to raise the ambition of our UK-India comprehensive strategic partnership, covering security, defence, technology, climate, health and education, building on the unique bonds and cultural ties between our two countries. Crucially, this work will start with trade and investment, and I'm pleased to say we agreed to relaunch FTA negotiations early in the new year. Mr. Speaker, I also held a bilateral meeting with President Xi. This was the first leader-level meeting between the United Kingdom and China for 6 years. We had a frank, constructive, pragmatic discussion as G20 economies and permanent members of the Security Council, and at a time of huge volatility. We both recognise the importance of engagement. I was clear that we will always act in our national interest. We need to work together on challenges like climate change and delivering growth. We agreed a new dialogue on these issues, which my Right Honourable friend the Chancellor will take forward with Vice Premier Hay in Beijing. Now, of course, there will continue to be areas where we don't agree, and we will address them clearly and frankly. That includes a number of issues on human rights, the sanctioning of members of this House, and, of course, Hong Kong. But, Mr. Speaker, here too we need to engage. The lesson of history is that we're better able to deal with problems, and the world is safer when leaders talk. So we agreed to keep this channel of communications open. Mr. Speaker, whilst it was not on the formal agenda of the G20, the spectre of conflict loomed large over the summit, spreading misery, destruction and despair, and causing children to starve and families to flee their homes. So I called again for the immediate and unconditional release of the hostages in Gaza, who are always uppermost in our minds. I also called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and for a massive increase in the flow of aid to Gaza, which is desperately needed. And yesterday we backed a UN Security Council resolution to that end. We must find ways to make this international pressure count to end the suffering on all sides. Mr. Speaker, the G20 also coincided with 1,000 days of conflict in Ukraine. And for the third year running, Putin did not attend. Instead, on the eve of the summit, he launched Russia's biggest attack for months, killing yet more innocent Ukrainians and hitting civilian energy infrastructure at the start of winter. And he indulged yet again in dangerous, irresponsible rhetoric. Mr. Speaker, this is a member of the Security Council acting with contempt for the UN Charter. And while Brazil made finding solutions to hunger and poverty the focus of its presidency, in recent weeks, Russian missiles have continued to rain down on civilian ships carrying grain bound for Africa. It could not be more clear. This is a man who wants destruction, not peace. And after 1,000 days of war, 1,000 days of Ukrainian bravery and sacrifice, I am clear that we must double down in our support. We will not be deterred or distracted by reckless threats. we have consistently said we will do what it takes to support Ukraine and put it in the best possible position going into the winter. The UK's support for Ukraine is always for self-defence. It is proportionate, coordinated and agile, and a response to Russia's own actions. And it is in accordance with international law. Under Article 51 of the UN Charter, Ukraine has a clear right of self-defence against Russia's illegal attacks. So, Mr. Speaker, I say again, Russia could roll back their forces and end this war tomorrow. But until then, we will stand up for what we know is right, for Ukraine's security and for our own security. And we will back Ukraine with what is needed for as long as it's needed. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, in challenging times, I take the view that British leadership matters more than ever. So for the sake of our growth, our security, and making our presence felt, giving the British people a voice on the global stage once again, standing up for the national interest, and I commend this statement to the House.
Yeah. I call the Leader of the Opposition, Kevin Bernal.
With your permission, Mr. Speaker, just before my statement, may I take the opportunity to express my heartfelt condolences on behalf of me and my party on the death of Lord Prescott. He was a titan of British politics in the 1990s, one of this country's greatest examples of social mobility, and a true patriot. No one who had 2 Jags could not love this country. And we all especially remember that moment when he connected with the electorate during the 2001 general election. Many of us all across the country and the public were very much on his side during that altercation. But may he rest in peace. Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of his statement. As he said, this week marked the 1,000th day of Russia's unprovoked invasion. Ukraine is in a fight for its survival, and the people of Ukraine are in our thoughts daily, but those thoughts must translate into action from us and from our allies. I am proud of the contribution to Ukraine made by the last Conservative government. £12 billion in military, humanitarian and economic support, a commitment to spend at least £3 billion a year on military support, and hitting Russia with the largest sanctions package ever imposed on a major economy. I said we would be a constructive opposition. I meant it. We will work with the government to ensure British support for Ukraine is steadfast and continues. However, at the G20, the Prime Minister was not able to achieve his goal of leaders doubling down on Ukraine's support. As Chancellor Scholz said, it is too little when the G20 cannot find the words to make it clear Russia is responsible for the war. The Prime Minister's meeting with the Chinese president has also attracted much interest. A day after his meeting with President Xi, in which the Prime Minister said he wanted a respectful relationship where both countries avoid surprises, 45 pro-democracy campaigners were imprisoned in Hong Kong. I was disappointed not to hear the Prime Minister condemn that time. Will he do so now unequivocally? And can he confirm that he explicitly called for the repeal of the national security law and for an end to Jimmy Lai's politically motivated trial when he met with President Xi? And can the Prime Minister point to any tangible benefits for UK interests from this meeting? Moving on to COP. COP has not yet concluded, so we do not know what the final impact on the UK will be. But we do know the Prime Minister's rush to a further cut in our emissions is yet another example of politicians putting short-term publicity above long-term planning. When will he publish the plans to achieve this new target? Exactly. Mr. Speaker, where this government does the right thing, we will back it. Yet where it puts politics before people and press releases before practicality, we will hold them to account. It is time for politicians to tell the truth, and it is time the Prime Minister provided some substance to back this costly rhetoric. Given how badly things are going at home, I'm sure it was a lot easier being in Baku and at the G20. But while he was in Rio de Janeiro, hard-working farmers were protesting outside Downing Street gates at his cruel family farms tax. His government has stoked inflation. The budget has caused employers to warn of job losses. price hikes and shop closures due to Labour's jobs tax. He needs to show what he is doing abroad is in the interest of this country and making lives better. That is why I welcome his continuation of FTA negotiations with India. However, outside the work that we started, at the moment, the Prime Minister's foreign policy is a pick and mix of empty platitudes, unilateral commitments that he could have announced at home, and dangerous precedents. Rushing to give away the Chagos Islands and paying for the privilege, an ill-judged suspension of export licenses to Israel, damaging our defence and security industry, and failing to set out a roadmap for spending 2.5% of GDP on defence in a world that is becoming yet more dangerous. Mr. Speaker, I hope the Prime Minister is up to the very real and serious challenges posed to our security and prosperity. He has many questions to answer this morning, and I look forward to hearing his response.
Can I thank the Leader of the Opposition for her tribute to John Prescott? We really do appreciate that, and I'm sure his family will appreciate it as well. And on the broad issue of Ukraine, I do welcome the continued unity across this House. This conflict has gone on for just over 1,000 days, and I'm proud of the fact that across the House throughout that time we have had unity, and I welcome the fact that we will continue to do so. The only winner, if we divide on this, is Putin, and I'm not prepared to let that happen. In relation to the G20 words, it was clear about the Charter, but my position, I think, on doubling down was absolutely clear in everything I said on the record at G20 and everything I've said and done in the last few weeks. Mr. Speaker, in relation to China, I made it very clear in my meeting with the President that where we disagreed, would we be frank and open about that disagreement and raise those issues of concern. On the specific question of the action in Hong Kong, Minister West made a statement condemning this just a few days ago, and I'm very happy to repeat and affirm her position, because of course that is the government's position. And she will have seen some of the references to the other issues that I raised in my own meeting that are raised consistently with the Chinese by all members of this government, and actually, to be fair, by members of the previous government when they were in office. And I think, again, there's a lot of common ground there. On COP, we used it on pushing forward on the targets. I have to say, it is a shame that what used to be a cross-party issue not so many years ago, I remember COP when it was in Scotland, when COP was in Scotland, there was a real unity across the House about the importance of tackling one of the most central issues of our time. I think the fact that she has now taken the position she has of attacking the very idea of setting targets shows just how far the party opposite has fallen. And on an issue like this, I was proud that under some of her predecessors we had that unity. It's a shame it's now been lost because of the position adopted by the opposition. On the question of G20, and she references me being in Rio when the farmers were protesting, G20 is the leading economies of the world getting together to discuss questions of common issues on the economy and on security. If her implication is that the UK should not be there at leader level, that we should join Putin in avoiding that meeting, if that's the position of her party, then she should say so.
Chair of the Select Committee, Emily Thornbury.
At this time of such great uncertainty and so many threats, there has never been a more important time for Britain to be back on the world stage, and we have been missed. We can be a force for good, and our great friend, the sadly missed John Prescott, would be cheering the Prime Minister on as he takes a leadership in the most important tackling the most important threat of all, that of tackling climate change. John was an early champion of it. Could my right honourable friend take this opportunity to give us more details and explain why the UK-led Global Green Power Alliance, which I understand uses our convening power on international finance to unlock private finance to support the climate transition and to help the developing world?
Well, I thank her for that question. The Clean Power Alliance is a global alliance, and countries are lining up to sign what is our initiative. This is to speed up the development of renewables, to make sure we got the funding, and this is the great opportunity. Climate is a huge challenge. We have obligations which we must meet globally. It's also the single biggest opportunity we have for investment into jobs in this country, for energy security, and to ensure the safety and security of everyone in this country. Thank you.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Edward Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I echo your words about the passing of John Prescott? He dedicated himself to serving people, and his enormous influence will be felt long into the future, not just in this country but around the world, with his incredible achievement of achieving the world's first international agreement on climate change at Kyoto. Our thoughts are with his family and friends across this House as well. Can I thank the Prime Minister for his statement? And I welcome his commitment at Baku to the new emissions targets. We support them. But can I ask him, when will he set out an action plan to meet those targets? Mr. Speaker, many families across the country will be worried not just about climate change, but about an increasingly insecure world. The devastating conflict in the Middle East, the actions of China, not least with the continuing imprisonment of Jimmy Lai, the war in Sudan, and I was alarmed to see no mention of Sudan in the G20 declaration, and on our own continent, where Putin's forces continue to wage their illegal and outrageous war against the innocent people of Ukraine. On the Middle East, Mr. Speaker, we welcome the reiteration of the G20's commitment to the two-state solution and calls for ceasefires in Gaza and Lebanon. But with the United States once again vetoing a UN resolution for a ceasefire in Gaza, does the Prime Minister agree that now is the moment for the UK to recognise the independent state of Palestine? And on Ukraine, we welcome the new approvals on long-range missiles. We must give our Ukrainian allies whatever they need to win this war. But the reality is that this support should have been given sooner. Why has it taken the threat of a second Trump presidency for action? Mr. Speaker, this is a war for our security and for the values we hold dear. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that now is the moment for the UK to lead in Europe? So will the Prime Minister convene a summit of European leaders to seize the Russian assets which are at our fingertips? Mr. Speaker, we must not and cannot look back at this moment and wonder whether we could have done more.
Prime Minister.
Can I again thank him for his tribute to John Prescott, and I was pleased to set out our emissions target, and of course we'll set out our plan, but the single most important issue is achieving clean power by 2030. That is the game changer, and is one of the 5 missions in government. On Sudan, he rightly raises an important issue, and I did raise that myself at the G20. On Gaza, we obviously supported the UN Security Council resolution, as I referenced in my words earlier, and we do have long-standing policy on recognising Palestine as part of the process. A two-state solution is the only way for a political solution to this awful and ongoing conflict. On Ukraine, look, careful decisions are made, coordinated and collaborated with our key allies. On Russian assets, action is being taken, and that is already being done on a number of forums, as I think he knows. Thank you.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. Can I congratulate the Prime Minister on the restoration of UK leadership on tackling Lord Prescott, who did so much to lead on Kyoto, would be truly proud of his work and the work of his cabinet. Now, I was very proud to lead the IPU delegation from the UK to Baku this weekend, where we heard loud and clear the report from finance experts that say we need $1 trillion a year in climate finance between now and 2030. The UK has led from the front, but the reality is we can't hit that target without building a bigger World Bank. Now, we could lead that charge by recycling some of the £3 billion we get back from the European Investment Bank. Is that an initiative the Prime Minister could look into?
Well, I thank him for his question. On the question of UK leadership, we are back leading on the stage, and the sentiment amongst other leaders is they're glad to see the UK back leading on those issues. Their words to me, they feel there's been an absence under the previous government. On the question of finance, this is really important. I do think that there are a number of ways we should leverage and can leverage private money in to meet the very important challenge, whether that's the global climate challenge or other challenges, and we took steps at COP to set out how those mechanisms could be improved. Thank you.
Sir John Whittington.
Can I strongly welcome the decision to allow Ukraine to strike against targets in Russia from which missiles, drones and glide bombs are launched? But in discussing how best to support Ukraine, can he say what progress was made in assisting Ukraine's own military-industrial sector to allow them to develop their own technology and to reduce their reliance on the West?
I thank him for raising that issue, because I think it is very important that that work goes on, and we are obviously making our own contribution to that. I won't go into the details, as he will understand, here in the House, but I can make sure that he'll have a meeting, should he wish one, to just give some of the details of that.
Melanie Neal.
Mr. Speaker, in the Prime Minister's statement, he refers to the £1 billion investment for wind turbines in Hull. Can I ask the Prime Minister how he envisions that will benefit and improve the lives and opportunities for my constituents in Great Grimsby and Cleethorpes?
Well, I was very pleased to announce this work in Hull. It'll be about 1,300 jobs, well-paid jobs in Hull, making the blades for wind turbines. Mr. Speaker, it wasn't that many years ago I went to the Whiteleys wind farm up just outside Glasgow. There's 350 or so wind turbines up there. I asked the question, how many of these were built in Britain? The answer came back, none, not a single component. And so not only is this very good for Hull, well-paid, secure jobs, it's very good for the United Kingdom that we are now beginning to make the components for wind turbines.
Sir Ian Duncan-Smith.
Mr. Speaker, can I return the Prime Minister to his meeting with President Xi? He may have recalled that at the time President Xi had put 4 red lines, one of which was about democracy and human rights, which he said he would allow no challenge. Now, during the course of the meeting, what has concerned many Hong Kong refugees here who've fled Hong Kong, and I have been in contact with them, they were worried about the Prime Minister's failure to condemn the arrest of the 45 and to call for their release and that of Jimmy Lai. So I don't believe he really answered that question properly, so I'm going to give him another opportunity if you wouldn't mind. Would he now get to the dispatch box, forget about another minister might have said it, and say right now that he, as Prime Minister, condemns the Chinese government for their arrest and incarceration of the 45 peaceful democracy campaigners and calls for them to release them and Jimmy Lai immediately, because they're in breach of the Sino-British agreement.
Well, I'm very happy to affirm and confirm all of that. I did raise these issues, Minister West, but I said I condemned it a moment ago, and I'm happy to say so. I just did. I'll say it again. But I do. I mean, look, the right honourable member has raised these are serious issues that he's consistently raised, and I recognise that, and we've discussed it between ourselves on previous occasions. It is important that where we have these significant differences, particularly on issues of human rights, that we have frank, open discussions about them, and that is why these matters have been raised repeatedly, and I myself raised them in the meeting that I had earlier this week and will continue to do so. But I'm very happy to be clear about that condemnation and just to repeat it for him.
Alex Sherman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know the Prime Minister shares my disappointment in the weakness of the G20 statement on Ukraine compared to the G7 statement. When he met with President Xi, did he raise China's support of Russia in regards to the war in Ukraine and ask them to step back and join us in trying to end the war in Ukraine on fair terms for the Ukrainians?
Yes, I did raise those the position of China's stance in relation to the conflict, and there's a clear readout of the meeting, and it's not the first time it's been raised by this government or, in fairness, by the previous government.
Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Not all members of the G20 at the summit are as concerned about the Russian invasion of Ukraine as is the UK. Ahead of the summit, it was said that the Prime Minister would talk about the unfathomable consequences if Putin succeeds. Did the Prime Minister talk to some of those sceptical leaders about those consequences, and what did they say?
Well, yes, of course I did. Russia's a member of the G20. Putin wasn't there. Party opposite seems to be suggesting we shouldn't have been there, which I find a very odd position, the implication. But yes, of course, I think it's really important to take every opportunity at leader level at these sorts of meetings to have the discussions we need to have with our allies, our close allies, but also to have the discussions that we need to have by those that don't agree with us, so we can raise those concerns and try to find a way forward. So we did do that.
Deborah Abraham.
Mr. Speaker, can I associate myself with your remarks, the Prime Minister's remarks, and others about the late Lord Prescott? He really was a one-off, and I will never forget his kindness and support to me. On the substantive issue of the statement, though, I'd like to congratulate the Prime Minister and colleagues for last night's Security Council vote to try and get Israel to provide humanitarian access to Gaza. Yeah. But on its own, it won't stop the Israeli government's destruction of Palestinian lives and homes. The inaction that we saw from the previous government over the last year mean that there's an even greater pressure on this government and to act quickly. So given Israeli government ministers are knowingly ignoring international law and ordering preparations for the annexation of illegal settlements to start in January next year, will the Prime Minister impose sanctions on them and the organisations that fund them?
Well, I'm grateful to her for raising the important issue of the West Bank and settlements, because it is a major cause of concern. It has been for some time, and it's an escalating cause of concern, and certainly sanctions have been imposed in the past and will continue to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I welcome the statement condemning China's actions that the Prime Minister has given, but could he make a commitment here, now, and completely clearly that before any minister meets with any Chinese official, they will meet with the family of Jimmy Lai, or indeed any of the other many Hong Kongers who are here who've now got families detained? Because we know, we can brief him on it, that there are Hong Kongers here in the United Kingdom today who are threatened by the Chinese state here in the UK today, and it is his job to defend the people of this country, not to bow to the people in Beijing.
Defending the people of this country is what we do every day. Raising these important issues is the right way to do it. I was very clear about what I raised. It's a matter of public record, as he will well know.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In the last few days, the Labour government has reaffirmed our commitment to Ukraine in its existential war against Russian aggression, reaffirmed our commitment to combating climate change in all our interests, and backed the UN's resolution for a ceasefire in Gaza and the release of all hostages. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that at a time of global volatility, geopolitical uncertainty and rising authoritarianism, it is more important than ever that Britain and Britain's values are back in action on the global stage?
I do, and it's clear that we live in a more volatile time now than I think many of us can remember. These are issues of global concern, whether that's climate change or conflict, and they have a direct impact back in the United Kingdom, and therefore it's in our national interest that we show the leadership we have been showing on these issues, leadership which was sadly missing under the last government.
Seamus Logan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself and my colleagues with your remarks and that of honourable members on the passing of John Prescott. John was a deeply principled man, clearly driven by a desire to improve people's lives. Our thoughts are with his wife Pauline and his family. Mr. Speaker, the investment we have seen in renewables, particularly in Scotland, is not only essential in tackling the climate crisis, but has the potential to enable people to live in warmer homes with lower bills. However, the totally outdated setup of the UK's energy market, where electricity prices are tied to global gas prices, means that people are not feeling the benefit of the rollout of cheap renewable energy sources. Can the Prime Minister tell us, as temperatures drop below freezing and millions of pensioners struggle without the winter fuel payment, will he now commit to domestic energy price reform?
This is a really important point. I'm grateful to him for raising it. We are powering forward to clean power by 2030, which will achieve not just independence, particularly to stop Putin putting his boot on our throat with energy bills. Everybody has suffered because of that. It will also bring down cheaper bills, which is really important. And, of course, the point he made at the beginning of his intervention, which is the next generation of well-paid, secure jobs across the United Kingdom, including in Scotland.
Rachel Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A couple of years ago, the constituents of North Warwickshire and Bedworth were hit hard by rocketing gas prices and energy bills because the last government left the UK hooked on global gas markets, controlled by dictators like Vladimir Putin. Following the COP summit, can the Prime Minister reassure my constituents that he will work relentlessly to make sure nothing like that ever happens again to my constituents in North Warwickshire and Bedworth?
Yes, I can, and this is an important point. All countries were impacted by the conflict in Ukraine. We were impacted more than other countries because some of the steps that could have been taken in the move towards renewables were not taken at speed by the previous government, and people across the country paid the price.
Sir Julian Lewis.
Given the Prime Minister's unequivocal backing of Ukraine and his admirable assertions that Putin must be seen to fail, will he rule out replacing, if she has to be replaced, our professional diplomatic ambassador in Washington by a party politician who has stated that Ukraine must lose the occupied territory to Russia, must give up on becoming a member of NATO, and must rely instead on security guarantees from the European states?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank him for the joint position in relation to the importance of Ukraine, and I will resist the temptation he offers for me to start discussing the position that he referenced.
Paul Wall.
Mr. Speaker, can I echo your remarks about Lord Prescott and those of the Prime Minister too? He was a true embodiment of working class values and aspiration, and as he always used to say, nothing's too good for the workers. Mr. Speaker, this weekend I'll be joining Rochdale's Ukrainian community to commemorate the 91st anniversary of the Holodomor, Stalin's man-made famine against the Ukrainian people that resulted in the loss of up to 4 million lives. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that the Russians will never crush the spirit of the Ukrainian people and that we will do everything possible to aid them in their defence against Russian aggression?
Yes, I do agree with that, and I was struck, I think members of all parties will have been struck during the general election campaign, that wherever I campaigned, and I'm sure others campaigned across the country, the support for Ukraine was there in every quarter of the United Kingdom, and I'm very proud of the fact that that's the position across our country.
Richard Tash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was struck in the Prime Minister's statement that there was not a single reference to our most important security or trading partner, the United States, particularly at this time of change with the good news of the election of President Trump. But whilst the Prime Minister was at the COP conference, of course, he may have missed the fact that growth is falling in this country, debt is rising, and the motor industry is panicking as jobs are being destroyed. Nissan just yesterday announced further job cuts, as have Ford, because of electric vehicle targets, which is causing irreversible damage to our motor industry.
What's the question?
I don't think it was a question, but look, we've stabilised the economy. We've got an absolute mission on growth. There was no growth for 14 years. And I think his party was cheering along the mini-budget not so long ago, which was the major cause of many of the problems that we're facing today.
Rachel Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I offer my condolences to Lord Prescott's family. He was a true pioneer, inspiring role model, and remembered here and in every place that benefited from his leadership and support for communities and neighbourhoods. Mr. Speaker, last month I met with my constituent, Sebastian Lai, and we talked about my constituent, Jimmy Lai, the British citizen who's been arbitrarily detained. And can I share here my heartfelt thanks and the thanks of my constituent's family to the Prime Minister for raising this while he was at the G20. Can the Prime Minister share with us his expectations as a result of this conversation? Thank you.
Well, I did raise it personally myself because it's such an important case and it's very important that we continue to do so. And that is raised by government ministers every time we engage with China. It's such an important case. This House knows the details of it, which is why I raised it and took the opportunity in the meeting I had earlier this week to raise it directly with the President.
John Glenn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I think everyone in this House welcomes high ambitions for our country. But in the face of the complexity of delivering against the ambitious targets that the Prime Minister has set out, there will be apprehensiveness around when other countries follow down that track at a different pace and the implications for our economy. But could I draw the Prime Minister's attention to the excellent comments made by his Chancellor about the financial services industry last week at Mansion House? And what assessment has he made of the prospects of another economic and financial dialogue with China, building on the one that I attended in 2019 in London, as an opportunity to extend economic dialogue which has to be positive for the UK economy?
Well, I'm grateful to him for referencing the Chancellor's Mansion House speech last week, which was an excellent speech. I do think on matters economic, there is a dialogue to be had with China. It needs to be pragmatic, it needs to be serious, and it needs to sit alongside the frank discussions we need to have, as we've referenced in this House, on the issues where we disagree. But I do think there's room for that dialogue in the national interest, in our own interests. Thank you.
Abdullah Mohammed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to associate myself with the condolences passed today for Lord Prescott. I welcome leaders of the G20 calling for a comprehensive ceasefire in Gaza and Lebanon and the UK's decision to support a resolution on the ceasefire. I'd like to thank the Prime Minister's personal involvement in ensuring this was going to happen. Sadly, we seem to be moving further and further away from peace. Gaza is on the verge of famine. Palestinians are being deprived by Israel of food and humanitarian aid. The countdown, Mr. Speaker, on UNRWA coming to an end is looming. Can the Prime Minister share what conversations he has had to press Israel to either reverse or pause their decision, or explain how they will meet their obligations under international law?
I thank her very much for raising this issue. I have pressed it on numerous occasions with many leaders in the region and elsewhere. We have to keep pressing for the hostages to be released, and we must never forget that they have been held for a very long time in the most awful of circumstances, and what their parents their families are going through is absolute torture. But we absolutely also need to be clear that aid is desperately needed into Gaza, where there have been tens of thousands of people killed. That aid needs to go in. It needs to go in urgently, and I will continue to keep pressing that case.
Ellie Chams.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, time is running out at COP29 and the clock is ticking on the climate crisis. I very much welcome the leadership shown by the Prime Minister in attending COP29, setting ambitious targets for the UK. The need to agree a global finance goal is vital, and progress in Baku is clearly challenging. Can the Prime Minister assure me that he is pulling out all the stops this week to ensure that agreement is reached, that it will be adequate to meet the needs of the poorest countries, and can he assure the House that the UK's pledges will be primarily in the form of grants? Thank you.
Well, I'm grateful to her for raising this. Those discussions, as she knows, are ongoing, and it's very important that we play our full part in making sure that they conclude in a satisfactory way. I think alongside that, it's very important that we push the case for leveraging private finance as well, which will be needed to meet this challenge, and we're continuing to do that. Thank you.
Mark Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome the Prime Minister's global leadership? He has restored our place on the world stage. Climate change is the biggest threat that faces us all, and that used to be an uncontroversial statement, which is why I was stunned to hear the Leader of the Opposition describe the actions we have taken to deal with this problem being done for short-term publicity. Absolutely outrageous. Is the Prime Minister as delighted as I am that the climate sceptics of the Conservative Party are sat on those benches so that we can take the long-term decisions on these ones?
Well, I'm grateful for him for raising it. I do think it is a great shame that the party opposite has decided to go backwards on this important challenge. Not so many years ago, this was a united position across the House because it's such an important challenge. I think it is simply a sign of how far the party opposite has fallen. It's unsurprising that they're on those benches. May they remain there for a very long time.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I welcome the commitments which were shared with Prime Minister Modi in the discussion the Prime Minister had. He set out in his statement the position of reigniting the free trade talks which were begun under the last government. Will he set out any red lines that he set out on that free trade agreement, and indeed the timetable that he's agreed? A previous Prime Minister promised a free trade agreement by Diwali. Will this Prime Minister set a different timescale?
I think you'll find the previous government made lots of promises about lots of things. The only unifying factor is that they actually met none of those promises at all. What we did was to heighten the ambition for the agreement and to make clear that the negotiations would restart early in the next year. Of course, there are checks and balances and discussions to be had in that, but I'm pleased that we've raised the ambition that the engagement was constructive and in the best interests of our country.
Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I associate myself with the comments of the Prime Minister about the late John Prescott, who's a giant of this place and the Labour movement, and my condolences go to his family and loved ones. Now, the Prime Minister may know that as the G20 communique once again recommitted to advancing the goal of a world free of nuclear weapons, a groundbreaking and upsetting BBC documentary aired showing the harrowing experiences of British nuclear test veterans and uncovered vital new information. I know the Prime Minister has long supported these men and their families, so will he agree to meet with them, myself and the members of South Holland and the Deepings and South Shields to discuss the government's next steps in securing long-awaited truth and recognition?
Can I thank her and pay tribute to her personal work on this issue, which she has been pressing for a number of years with considerable success. As she knows, I previously met the veterans myself, and members of the government will be happy to do so in the future. It's a really important issue, and again, she has been pressing for this for some years, and I pay tribute to her for that.
Nick Timothy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Regarding the Prime Minister's plan to decarbonise the grid by 2030, can he guarantee in that time frame that there will be no power shortages, no blackouts and no energy rationing?
Yes.
Florence Islami.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I also wish to associate myself with the remarks of the Prime Minister. I remember the late Lord Prescott visiting the Clapham Park project, one of the New Deal for Communities areas, and in true John Prescott style, he turned up on the estate in his Jaguar. And Madam Deputy Speaker, food insecurity is such a big issue, and floods and drought can cause food insecurity for many countries, and data from the Trussell Trust in 2023 highlighted 7.2 million people, including 17% of children, faced food poverty. I attended an event earlier this week hosted by my right honourable friend, the member for Hackney South and Shoreditch, Too Good to Go, highlighting how we can use food surplus and help retailers and consumers. Can the Prime Minister please outline how he's working with international partners to highlight this really crucial but sometimes untalked about issue of food insecurity?
Well, I'm very grateful to her for raising this, and food security was an issue that I did raise in the G20 earlier this week. She also references floods, and for anybody now sceptical about COP, there was a very powerful set of interventions by the Spanish Prime Minister about the impact that climate has had very recently in Spain with the terrible flooding there, and it's a really material reminder of why we must never let up and why we shouldn't really divide on this important issue of climate change.
We're a Hoghouse.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. A breakthrough moment at COP28, the previous COP, was the creation of the Loss and Damage Fund. But the financial contributions of each individual country was miserable, including that of the UK. Supporting communities in climate-vulnerable countries is in all of our interests because it prevents large-scale migration when land becomes inhabitable. Will the Prime Minister commit to a financial contribution that is increased to the Loss and Damage Fund?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to set out financial contributions here. The focus that we brought to COP was on the future action that is needed, the resilience planning that is needed, and being absolutely determined to work with partners to make the transition, for example, to clean energy across so many other countries.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I associate myself with the remarks from Mr. Speaker and that of the Prime Minister about John Prescott. John Prescott, although I didn't know him personally, was clearly, I think it's fair to say, a phenomenon. The Prime Minister will be fully aware of the importance of Jaguar Land Rover and Tata Group's investments here in the United Kingdom, but also to the constituency, my constituency of Warwick and Leamington. So can he give us his assessment of UK-India relations following his bilateral with Prime Minister Modi?
I thank him for that, the relations with India after the discussions earlier this week were in a constructive and positive place, and that is good for his constituents and good for the country. I have separately, as he will know and will have expected, discussed issues with the Tata Group in relation to their investment into this country.
David Mundell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Obviously, President Lula's global alliance against poverty and hunger is to be welcomed. But such initiatives become mere platitudes if they're not backed up by action and resources. So what, in practical terms, is the UK's commitment to this initiative?
Well, it was an important initiative, and we backed it earlier this week, and will support the actions that come out of it, and that's something I made clear in my contribution. But he's absolutely right that these initiatives do need to be backed up by action to carry them forward, and we will make sure that they are. Thank you.
Ashley Dalton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I add my voice to the tributes made to Lord Prescott today. Thank you. I thank the Prime Minister for his update on COP29, and I ask the Prime Minister what his priorities are for the UK's international climate leadership in the run-up to COP30 in Brazil, and did he discuss this with President Lula in their bilateral discussions?
Yes, I did, because I think COP next year is a very significant and important COP. I think everybody recognises that. And what is needed more than anything is for other countries to follow the lead of this country in relation to their emissions targets, and I discussed that directly with him.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Could I add my condolences to John Prescott's family at his loss, and my thanks to John for his life and in particular the joy of campaigning with him where he's much loved during the 2017 and 2019 elections. The Prime Minister is right to say that the refugee flows are in part caused by climate change. They're also caused by wars. So I would like to know what the G20 summit said about the wars in Sudan and in Congo, as well as the need for a ceasefire in Gaza. And whilst Russia's invasion of Ukraine is obviously wrong, what pathway does he see to bringing about a cessation of that conflict, rather than putting long-range missiles in, which can only exacerbate the conflict with Russia and lead us to a very dangerous place indeed? Is there a pathway to an end to that war that he sees, or anyone else in the G20 saw during their meetings?
I'm grateful to him for his question. I did raise the question of both climate and conflict as major drivers of migration across the world, which is why they need to be addressed at the international level. In relation to Ukraine, I was very, very clear that Russia is in breach of the UN Charter. This is Russian aggression against a sovereign country in Europe, the sort of aggression I didn't think I would see in my lifetime again. And we must ensure that Putin does not win this war. And that's why I've been so clear in standing with Ukraine for as long as it takes, and providing them with whatever resource that they need in order to do so.
Jacob Collier.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for his statement and for his display of unity with the French President Emmanuel Macron on Armistice Day. We've gone from Tory Prime Ministers who question whether France is even an ally, leave Normandy early, to a Labour Prime Minister who stands shoulder to shoulder with our French and European allies. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that strong alliances with our European neighbours are crucial for our peace and security?
Yeah. Yes, I do. And to attend the Armistice Day in France was really a special and important... I'm sorry? Armistice. I was saying it was a very special and moving occasion, remembering all of those who lost their lives for the freedoms that we... So, not sure why he wants to chunter through that, but we were able collectively to reflect on all those that lost their lives, not only in the First World War, but in every conflict since. We must never lose sight of the fact that many of those that we lost were there buried in France, and it was a very special moment to be there.
Graham Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. John Prescott was a remarkable climate diplomat, funny, moving and strangely mesmerising speaker, but he was also aware that while ambitious climate targets are necessary, that climate action is essential. And in that light, I understand that the hydrogen allocation round 1 agreements are ready to go. Can the Prime Minister commit to get those out, issued to companies, so we can get the hydrogen economy going, the jobs that go with it, before Christmas?
Well, I want this to proceed at pace. It is a really important initiative. There's no silver bullet here. I think we need to be working across all areas to get to the goal of clean power by 2030, and we'll continue to do so at pace.
Mark Ferguson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I wish to echo the remarks of the Prime Minister and others with regard to John Prescott. Rarely has there been a better example that working people are meant to govern, and I hope that John knew what a great example he was to so many of us on these benches and across this place. Yeah. It is clear that we must take a far larger role in international affairs. That is not optional at this time, but that role must translate into greater prosperity at home. Can the Prime Minister expand on how the conversations he had at the G20 and COP will bring greater levels of jobs and investment to communities like mine in Gateshead?
Can I agree with him that, firstly, international affairs are probably more important now than they've been for a number of years because of the volatility, but also a great opportunity because the next generation of jobs are there. There's a race on for those jobs, particularly in renewables. I want the UK not just to be in that race, but to be winning that race, and that is why in every international engagement I've had, I've pressed the case of the UK, and I'm very pleased with the investment that is now coming into our country. An example I gave was the investment into Hull, which I announced at COP, but at our investment summit a few weeks ago, £63 billion worth of investment into this country, which will be measured in good, well-paid jobs, was forthcoming, and that is good for our country.
Rebecca Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Given the Prime Minister's optimism on his return from COP29, can he tell the House how the deals he signed there will uphold his promise to cut energy bills by £300 for constituents like mine, and when they can expect to see this as a reality?
Yes, the direct investment into the jobs in Hull to build the turbines is obviously really important in that constituency and for the country, and I'll continue to make the case for those deals to be done with those jobs to come so we can drive forward to clean power. That will have the impact of energy security but also lowering energy bills.
Chris MacDonald.
Deputy Speaker, I had the privilege last week of meeting some of the members of the Ukrainian Parliament, and I know that they will have been heartened by the leadership that my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has shown on the world stage this week. Does he agree with me that there is only one aggressor in this conflict, and the way that to end the war is, in his own words, for Putin to get out of Ukraine?
Yes, I do, and I think we must never lose sight of the fact that this war could be ended today. If the aggressor ceased being aggressive, if Russia backed out and backed down. And there's no equivalence here. A sovereign country has been invaded, and that's why across this House we've stood with Ukraine for as long as it takes and will continue to do so.
Josh Babarinde.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm proud that the Liberal Democrats were the first UK-wide major party to call for an immediate bilateral ceasefire between Israel and Gaza, and we continue to push the Prime Minister to honour that position. I'm also proud that many Eastbourne campaigners have been calling for that from the get-go and coming out to condemn the rising tide of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism across the country. What global efforts did the Prime Minister discuss with G20 leaders to stem this tide of prejudice? And will he congratulate Muslim and Jewish leaders in Eastbourne, as well as incredible neighbourhood policing officers like Fareed Kamar, who you know, Madam Deputy Speaker, as well, for uniting to root out hate crime locally?
Look, I'm very happy to applaud anybody who is taking on the fight against hate crime in all its forms. And I think one of the sad features of the last few years has been the rise in hate crime in all its forms. And I think all of us have a responsibility, a duty to do everything we can to reduce hate crime. And therefore I'm very happy to applaud anybody involved in that, including in his constituency.
Jim Dixon.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I associate myself with the tributes to Lord Prescott and send my condolences to his family? I very warmly welcome the Prime Minister's statement, particularly on COP. It's great to see, as members across this House have acknowledged, the UK showing international leadership on action to combat climate change once more. Given this government's mission to make Britain a clean energy superpower, can the Prime Minister tell us about how Great British Energy will result in lower fuel bills for my residents in Dartford, Ebbsfleet, Swanscombe and Greenhive, as well as across the country?
Yes, Great British Energy, which will be publicly owned, will drive forward on renewables to clean power in 2030. We've got to make up time because of the slowness of the party opposite, but we're determined to do so. And this will be measured in energy independence so that Putin's boot will not be on our throat as it was in recent years, in the jobs of the future and in lowering energy bills.
Richard Holden.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. We know that one thing the Prime Minister was discussing with President Xi in August was the planning application for the Chinese embassy. He said to the President, "You raised the Chinese embassy planning when we talked on the phone, and we have since taken action by calling in that application." What discussions did Downing Street have with the Department on the call-in prior to the Deputy Prime Minister's decision to formally call in the Chinese embassy planning application?
Well, he'll know very well the application's been in for a number of years. It's something the previous government was looking at, and it's being dealt with in the usual process.
John Slinger.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and may I associate myself with the expressions of condolence
to Lord Prescott's family and friends. Given that this is UK Parliament Week, does the Prime Minister agree that his statement should reassure young people who need hope that global issues are tackled, that his and Minister's efforts at international forums such as COP29 and the G20 are vital? Would he further agree that it is this government that is renewing and strengthening our alliances and demonstrating that greater international cooperation can defend our values and leave a better world for our children?
Thank you for his question. I think we all need to remind ourselves that it is young people more than any who will live with the consequences of our actions or inactions, and that's why I'm very pleased that the UK is leading again on these important global issues. And amongst other leaders at the G20, the absence of UK leadership in recent years under the previous government was keenly felt.
Dr Ben Spencer.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I note the Prime Minister's comments on COP. He will know, of course, that the agricultural industry is one of the most difficult areas to decarbonise, requiring substantial investment. On that basis, will his family farms tax help or hinder?
Good question.
I'm very pleased that at the budget we put £5 billion over the next 2 years into farming and food sustainability, which is hugely important to support our farmers. He will also, no doubt, have noticed the money that's been allocated to deal with flooding, which is a constant cause of problems for farmers, and the money that's been put into dealing with the outbreak of disease, which is devastating for so many farmers. He will also know that in an average case of parents wanting to pass on a farm to one of their children, that by the time the various assessments are made, it's only those above 3 million who will be affected by this, despite the fear-mongering opposite. That means the vast majority of farms and farmers will be totally unaffected, as I know he appreciates.
Tony Vaughan.
Speaker, may I also associate myself with the Prime Minister's remarks about the late Lord Prescott. Now that the Prime Minister has met with the Chinese President, does the Prime Minister believe that we are now in a better position to advance UK interests and to challenge China on important issues such as human rights than we were for the 6 years previously, when no UK Prime Minister could even have those conversations because they did not go to China?
Well, I do think that's an important point. It's about getting the balance right, and that's why I took a pragmatic approach in the interests of this country to further our interests and to have frank discussions where they are necessary. But I do believe that it is better that we meet and engage than that we are absent from the international stage.
Max Wilkinson.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's focus on fighting climate change on the international stage is a welcome change to the conspiracy theories and equivocation that we had under the last government. One of the simplest ways to generate clean power in the UK is solar panels. One of the simplest ways to generate clean power in the UK is solar panels. So will his government take an interest in my private member's bill, the Sunshine Bill, to mandate solar energy generation on all new built homes when it comes to the Commons on the 17th of January?
I've had a lot of documents put in my box over the last few weeks. I'll make sure a Sunshine Bill is in there. I'll be able to give a better answer next time round.
Luke Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I echo the very warm tributes that have been made to Lord Prescott from across this House? One of the warmest tributes made to Lord Prescott from outside this House was by former Vice President Al Gore, who described him as an unwavering champion on climate action. I believe, therefore, that this government's alliance, the Global Clean Power Alliance, builds on that legacy, uniting countries to accelerate the transition towards clean energy. But can the Prime Minister set out how this alliance and this action will deliver lower bills for my constituents and deliver the UK's energy security in the future?
Yes, this alliance will push forward both the UK and other countries' drive towards renewables, and that will have an impact on the constituents of everybody in this House, because it will give energy independence, lower bills, and of course give us the next generation of jobs, which will go elsewhere if we don't win these contracts.
John Cooper.
In government, this party championed North Sea oil and gas, securing 200,000 jobs. 200,000 jobs, not just in Scotland, but right across this country, in every constituency, including my own, rural Dumfries and Galloway. The Prime Minister talks about us having Putin's boot on our throat. Surely pulling the plug on the North Sea oil and gas industry, as he is doing, delivers us into the hands of Putin and makes our energy security less viable.
Well said. As he knows very well, North Sea oil and gas is sold onto the international market and therefore is subject to exactly the constraints. And the proof is there. Over the last few years, we've had terribly high energy bills, worse in this country than other countries, and the suggestion that somehow the last government insulated us from the impact on other countries is ludicrous against the evidence.
Josh Fenton-Glynn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Today, the United Nations said that virtually no aid has got into Gaza for the past 40 days. This winter, hundreds of thousands face malnutrition or worse. Can the Prime Minister update me with conversations he had at the G20 that could help us end this conflict, release the hostages and finally get aid back into Gaza?
Yes, I repeatedly pressed this, not only at the G20 but elsewhere. That aid is desperately, desperately needed into Gaza, urgently and in greater volumes, much greater volumes than is currently making its way through. And so I've argued consistently for the release of the hostages. That has to be the starting point for that aid to get in to Gaza, and for all of us to work for a long-term solution here, which has to be a peaceful way to the two-state solution.
Shaukat Adam.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to thank the Prime Minister for his statement, and like the rest of the House, I agree that we must be a leading voice on the global stage. But I'd like to ask the Prime Minister why it was necessary to travel with 470 officials to the G20, notwithstanding the carbon footprint, but the cost to the public purse, especially as if I'm going to have a lot of cold pensioners this winter.
The contingent this year was actually fewer than the contingent last year. It involved a wide number of individuals. There's a lot of negotiation. A lot of negotiation, as he probably well knows, goes on at COP, and it's absolutely vital that we're there doing that important work.
Graham Downey.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think what was clear throughout the Prime Minister's statement was the need for defence collaboration across the world as we live in a much more unstable global situation. Can I ask the Prime Minister if, during his discussions with the Australian leadership, he was able to recommit the UK to AUKUS, and can you give us an update on the next steps, please?
I'm grateful to him for that question. On AUKUS, I was able to discuss it with the Australian Prime Minister in the G20, as I have done on previous occasions when I've discussed it with him, with our full commitment and pressing on to the next stages.
Jim Shannon.
Madam Deputy Speaker, on behalf of the Democratic Unionist Party, can I send our sincere sympathies to the family of John Prescott on his passing. He was indeed a mighty man, and he will be missed, but the one thing he's left behind is a legacy, and I think we can all recognise that. Prime Minister will be aware that for these summits to be effective, there must be global buy-in. To see world leaders such as France amongst those determining it was not a good use of time does, I believe, pose a question. If a new format is needed, what discussions has the Prime Minister had with other nations to ensure that meeting environmental obligations is not something to be avoided, but instead is something to get excited about? Thank you.
Well, I'm grateful and for his comments on John Prescott and his legacy, and that's why both on climate, which John felt very passionately about, and obviously the jobs that we've been able to announce going to Hull, I'm so pleased to build on that legacy. In terms of buy-in, this is a really important issue. It's why we need to show leadership, because we can't do this on our own, no country can, and therefore with the UK showing leadership, we can get the buy-in of other countries in whatever form and in whatever way that we can, and that's why I've worked so hard at COP on this issue, obviously raised again at the G20, and why I'm very supportive of initiatives for private finance to be leveraged in to help other countries meeting the obligations that they will have to make.
Final question, Douglas McAllister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm pleased to note that the Prime Minister had good discussions with Prime Minister Modi and deepened our bilateral ties and our unique bonds. Can the Prime Minister assure me that my constituent Jagtar Singh Johal's 7-year arbitrary detention was raised with Modi during those discussions to help bring him home to Dumbarton?
I thank him for raising that, and let me give him that reassurance that it was raised. It's an extremely important case, so it was raised by me. It has been raised by other ministers, as he would expect.
That concludes that business. I'll let the front bench have a few moments to swap over. What do you want to take off? Excuse me? Okay. Let's go. So we have a business statement from the Leader of the House. Leader of the House?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The business for the week commencing the 25th of November includes Monday, the 25th of November, second reading of the Non-Domestic Rating Multipliers in Private Schools Bill. Tuesday, the 26th of November, second reading of the Tobacco and Vapes Bill. Wednesday, the 27th of November, second reading of the Finance Bill. Thursday, the 28th of November, debate on a motion of the international status of Taiwan, followed by debate on a motion on the freedom of religion in Pakistan. The subjects of these debates were determined by the Backbench Business Committee. Friday, the 29th of November, private members' bills. The provisional business for the week commencing the 2nd of December includes Monday, the 2nd of December, general debate on the Grenfell Tower Inquiry Phase 2 report. Tuesday, the 3rd of December, second reading of the National Insurance Contributions Secondary Class 1 Contributions Bill. Wednesday, the 4th of December, Opposition Day, fourth allotted day, debate on a motion in the name of the official opposition, subject to be announced. Thursday, the 5th of December, business to be determined by the Backbench Business Committee. Friday, the 6th of December, private members' bills.
Leader.
Thank you very much indeed. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to associate this side of the House with the comments made about Lord Prescott's death. And I'm also delighted to hear that the House administration is aiming to win the Autistic Society's Autism Friendly Award. I know all colleagues will want to join me in wishing the House team good luck with that. Madam Deputy Speaker, in last week's episode of this long-running saga, I drew attention to the government's incompetence in having a budget which managed to raise the rate of national insurance, lower the NI threshold and increase the minimum wage all at the same time. I described this as a terrible blow to the retail and hospitality sectors and asked if the Treasury would publish an assessment of the total effect of these measures before they came to the House. Well, I need hardly have bothered, Madam Deputy Speaker, because barely 5 days later, what did we find? A letter from Tesco, Marks & Spencer, Sainsbury's, all the major supermarkets and many of the biggest names in the retail industry highlighting the budget's impact in forcing shop closures and job losses. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, the sad truth is there is nothing surprising here. It was completely obvious to everyone except the government that this unplanned triple whammy was likely to have this effect. So I asked the Leader again, will we see an analysis of its effects when the Finance Bill comes to the House next week or alongside the forthcoming National Insurance Contributions Bill? Otherwise, I think we should turn our attention to energy. The government's proclaimed its intention to make Britain a 100% clean energy producer by 2030. A couple of weeks ago, NESO, the new energy systems operator, published a report on how this might be done. But I must say, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm feeling a degree of embarrassment. I'd been under the impression that the Secretary of State for Energy was a slightly clownish figure, unable to eat a bacon sandwich without causing an international incident, with a political style closely modelled on that of Wallace and Gromit. Actually, Madam Deputy Speaker, I was quite wrong. In fact, like the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the Secretary of State may need to update his CV. I now realise that he's in fact a heroic figure, the Titan of transition. In fact, I would go further. The Energy Secretary is a modern Clark Kent, whose slightly bumbling comedic exterior is merely a disguise concealing a range of astonishing superpowers. think of what he will have to achieve if the UK is, as he promises, to have entirely carbon-free energy in just over 5 years' time. He'll have to build twice as many pylons and cables in that 5 years as we've built in the last 10. He'll have to get all this transmission infrastructure built on time and according to the reshape the planning rules, or the taxpayer will be forced to pay for wind turbines that stand idle. Like the Greek god Aeolus, this great baron of breeze will need to make sure the winds blow and contract as much offshore wind capacity in the next 2 years as in the last 6 combined. And he'll need to make sure the global price of carbon doubles or triples just to make the sums add up. And this is before one considers the effects of unexpected inflation, skills shortages, dependency on foreign energy technologies, intermittency of supply. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? Meanwhile, his plans for small modular reactors have been delayed while the Energy Secretary plunges ahead with his plans to cut off gas turbines and leave us dangerously reliant on expensive foreign energy imports. Madam Deputy Speaker, these plans are not simply heroic, they are fanciful, they are magical thinking, and what is worse, they are likely to be ruinously expensive both for the taxpayer and the electricity user. Little wonder that top business and union leaders have come together to describe them as, I quote, just not feasible and, quote, impossible. We've been here before in the 3-day week of the 1970s, Madam Deputy Speaker, and the result was blackouts and energy rationing. Is that what we should expect now? Again, this is the rub. Power reveals. What we are seeing is not merely a lack of competence. We are seeing an Energy Secretary who has still not made any statement on the NISO report that I quoted from. He is deliberately refusing to account for his actions to this House on this absolutely foundational matter, and he is holding the Commons in contempt. So I ask the Leader of the House, when can we expect a statement from the Energy Secretary on the NISO report? When will he be forced to come to the dispatch box to explain and defend this folly?
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. First of all, can I join Mr Speaker and others in marking the sad loss of John Prescott. He was a true legend. He was one of the best campaigners of our movement. He put the issues of climate change and real, meaningful levelling up at the top of the political agenda long before they were fashionable. He was groundbreaking, huge fun, and he'll be greatly missed, and we send our condolences to Pauline and the whole family. And as Mr Speaker said earlier, there will be an opportunity to pay tributes next week. I'm sure the whole House will also join me in marking Parliament Week, where we open our doors on the way we work in this place. And today is Ask Her to Stand Day, a day to encourage more women to seek elected office. Can I take this opportunity, Madam Deputy Speaker, to point the House to a motion I've tabled today, which makes some important changes to the proxy votes for members. One of my priorities as Leader of the House is about making Parliament more family-friendly. We now have more women than ever in this place, more parents of small children and caring responsibilities, and more disabled members. We need to change the way we do things to reflect the times. I've asked the Procedures Committee to continue their wider review of the proxy vote system, and the Modernisation Committee will consider these issues in due course. However, I have heard from members that the current system hasn't met some immediate needs. So I am extending the childbirth, miscarriage or baby loss proxy to explicitly cover complications during pregnancy or ongoing fertility treatment. Under this scheme, reasons for proxies remain confidential and are self-certified, requiring no onerous paperwork. And I'm making the default for all proxies 7 months, and I hope the whole House will welcome this. He raises a number of issues, but I mean, honestly, I have to say, I am losing track of the opposition's arguments in these areas. They attack our budget measures, yet they support all the investment. They don't like our decisions, yet they took many of the same ones in government. They ducked the difficult issues, yet criticise us for dealing with them. And yes, we've had to make some big choices, but we do stand by them, because we are on the side of ordinary people, on the side of NHS and public services, and we are operating in the interests of economic stability, unlike his party did, I'm afraid. And on the impact of the budget, we will see that over time, but the party opposite really do have to decide whether they support the investment going in, whether they support the extra spending going into our public services, or whether they don't want to see any of that at all and they're just against all of that support. I mean, I've got to say, I mean, picking on the Secretary of State for Energy and Net Zero, there is not a more accomplished member of the Cabinet who is driving his agenda forward. He is forthcoming to this House on many, many occasions, and I have to say, on every occasion he appears in this House, he absolutely wipes the floor with his opponent, because they are yet again on the wrong side of history. Yes, we do have a very ambitious mission to become a clean energy superpower by 2030, a mission we are driving forward. It's absolutely vital that we do that. And that does mean, yes, that does mean taking on some of the inherent issues that they ducked around our infrastructure, the grid, our planning laws, getting the investment where it's needed, and we're announcing that all the time, unlocking new power supplies, which we're doing in nuclear, solar, hydrogen and elsewhere, establishing Great British Energy, which is now well underway to ensure that we have got homegrown production, much needed. Taken together, they will lower bills, create new jobs and give us the energy security that his government failed to give us. And I've got to say, honestly, isn't the truth that they are just becoming the political opportunists? I mean, it really is. They spent years in government ducking the difficult decisions, leaving a huge black hole and a big mess for us to clean up. Public services were on their knees. Strike action costing £15 billion in lost productivity. Pay deals on ministers' desks with not a penny accounted for them, and not a single penny set aside for the compensation schemes. The reserves spent 3 times over, and inflation 11% under their watch. And living standards fell for the first time in our history under the party opposite. And now they want their cake and they want to eat it at the same time. All the benefits from the budget, but not the hard calls needed to pay for it. They've gone, I'm afraid, Madam Deputy Speaker, in a few short weeks from the party of government to the party of protest.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And as my right honourable friend has just mentioned, in so many ways illustrated so many aspects of the mess that this government has inherited from the last, whether it be longer waiting lists, our crumbling schools, our failing economy, or whatever. But you know, Madam Deputy Speaker, the mess is nowhere more visible than on the A46 in Warwickshire, between Coventry and Stratford, which actually adjoins my constituency, where last month, October, 12 tonnes of rubbish were collected from the roadside. That's because there was no clearing up done for many years. So yet another example of the mess being left behind. So can we have a debate in government time, not just on the potholes, but the mess that this government has left on the state of our roads?
Leader of the House. Well, what better symbol of the mess that we've inherited than all the mess left on the A46 in his constituency? And he raises a really important issue, and we are committed to tackling the plague of fly tipping and vandals who are creating a mess in our communities. And that's one of the reasons that we're cracking down on antisocial behaviour and introducing respect orders so that those who are responsible can clean up their own mess.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Marie Goldman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd also like to pay my respects to Lord Prescott. While we didn't serve in this place at the same time, it's impossible to have followed British